Okay, so I bet you're working hard on your English,
Yeah.
right? And you're ready to like really level up to
Oh.
sound more like a native speaker.
Yeah, that's the dream for a lot of people.
It is. It is. And today we're diving into this video script that's just it's packed with all these advanced tips. And we're going to pull out the absolute best stuff, the most actionable stuff to help you get there.
Like a cheat sheet.
Exactly. The cheat sheet to unlock that smooth, confident English, the kind of English that it just flows.
Yeah, and what's cool about this script, I think, is it goes beyond that surface level stuff. It gets into the why behind these techniques.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, some of the tips are, well, they're pretty surprising. Like, did you know that mimicking native speakers, almost like becoming a parrot for a bit, can actually rewire your brain for better pronunciation?
And it sounds crazy, but it works.
We're going to unpack all that. But first, let's talk fluency. I think we all want to sound smooth and effortless, right? Not like we're like searching for words every other second.
For sure. And the script tackles that head on with two exercises. Two exercises that I think you'll find really useful. The first one is called shadowing, and it's all about mimicking a native speaker. You listen to their pronunciation, their intonation, even their pauses, and you try to replicate it.
So it's like you're their shadow. You're trying to mirror their every move,
Mhm.
basically. But how does that actually help you become more fluent?
Well, think of it like learning a dance routine. At first, you're focusing on each individual step, right? And it feels awkward and it feels slow. But with practice, those movements, they become ingrained, like they're in your muscle memory. Shadowing does the same thing for your English. You're training your brain and your mouth to work together more efficiently. So the sounds and rhythms of English, they become more natural to you.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You're building those neural pathways for smoother, more automatic speech.
Exactly.
All right, so tell me about this other exercise. Speed talking, I think they called it. Sounds a little intense.
It can be, but in a good way. It's all about getting comfortable expressing yourself in English continuously without overthinking every word. Basically, you pick a topic that you're familiar with and you just talk about it nonstop for a whole minute.
Wow, a whole minute.
Yeah.
So it's like a verbal sprint. You're pushing yourself to keep the words flowing.
Right. And it can really help build your confidence and it helps you get over that fear of making mistakes.
I can see that. Because fluency isn't about speaking perfectly, right? It's about being able to communicate your ideas smoothly, confidently.
Yeah. And sometimes that means letting go of that need for perfect grammar. Just focus on getting your message across.
Okay, I'm starting to get the bigger picture here. It's about training your brain and your mouth to work together seamlessly, almost like an athlete training for a competition.
I like that analogy.
So speaking of training, let's move on to another area that trips people up, which is grammar. You might think that you need to master all these complex rules, to sound fluent. But the script, it actually challenges that assumption.
Yeah, it turns out that's not always the case.
It said something about simplifying grammar, right? In spoken English. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, think about it. When you're having a casual conversation, you don't usually speak in perfectly formed sentences with all the bells and whistles of formal grammar, right?
Right.
You use contractions, you simplify phrases, you prioritize getting your meaning across.
Yeah. They give a great example in the script, something about I would have gone versus I'd have gone.
Exactly. In a formal context, you might say, I would have gone to the party if I had known about it.
Right.
But in casual conversation, it's totally natural to just say, I'd have gone if I knew. It means the same thing, but it just sounds more relaxed, more conversational.
It does. So it's not about ignoring grammar altogether. It's about understanding how native speakers actually use it in everyday speech.
Exactly. And they make a really good point in the script about focusing on mastering the basic tenses, past, present, and future. Once those become second nature to you, you can free up your mental energy to focus on, what you actually want to say.
Right. Instead of getting bogged down in all the rules,
Right.
it's like building a house. You need that strong foundation of basic grammar before you start adding all the fancy architectural details.
I love that analogy.
Okay, I'm really liking how this script breaks things down into manageable steps. So what's next on our fluency journey?
Let's talk about something that can add a lot of color and personality to your English. Idioms and expressions.
Ooh, idioms. I love those. They can be tricky to learn, but they make you sound so much more natural, more engaging.
It's like you've unlocked a secret code of the language.
Exactly. And the script, it highlights how idioms can really elevate your English, make you sound less like a textbook and more like, Someone who really gets the nuances.
For sure. And they give a few examples, right?
Yeah, they talk about using wiped out or beat instead of just saying very tired.
It's much more expressive.
Right, like I'm not just tired, I'm wiped out. You can practically hear the exhaustion.
Exactly. And they also introduce the idioms break the ice, which is used for starting conversations, and spill the beans, which means to reveal a secret.
Right, like, oops, I spilled the beans about the surprise party. So, using idioms, it's like adding spices to your English. It goes from bland to flavorful. It makes you sound more like a native speaker. But with so many idioms out there, where do you even begin?
The script suggests starting small, gradually incorporating new idioms into your daily conversations. So pick a few that you like, understand their meanings, and then look for opportunities to use them.
So instead of saying, I'm tired, I could say, I'm completely wiped out. And maybe even add a dramatic sigh for emphasis.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm ready to spice up my English. But before we go any further, I have a question. This all sounds amazing, but I know our listeners are probably thinking, how am I supposed to find the time for all of this?
It's a great question, and we're definitely going to address that later in our deep dive. But first, let's unpack a few more of these techniques. Remember, even small efforts, consistent efforts, they can make a big difference over time.
Okay, good point. We're in this for the long haul. So what else does this script have in store for us on our journey to awesome spoken English?
Let's move on to something I find fascinating, the power of intonation and emphasis.
Intonation. You mean like how our voice goes up and down when we speak? I never really thought about that as a specific technique.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, but it plays a huge role in how we convey meaning and emotion. And emphasis, stressing certain words, it works together with intonation to create a more impactful delivery. The script, it explains how even subtle shifts in these things can totally change how your message is perceived.
They gave an example, right? Something about it was an amazing day versus it was an amazing day.
Exactly. The first sentence, with the emphasis on amazing, conveys genuine excitement. But the second one, with the flat intonation and the pause, well, it sounds hesitant, almost sarcastic, like the speaker isn't really convinced it was an amazing day at all.
Wow, that's incredible. I never realized how much intonation and emphasis could change the feeling of a sentence. So how do we get better at using those things?
Well, the script suggests practicing reading aloud with different intonations and emphasizing different keywords. You can also record yourself and then listen back to it.
It's like being an actor. You have to deliver your lines with the right emotion, the right emphasis to make the scene believable. Okay, I'm starting to see how all of this, the fluency, the grammar, idioms, and now intonation, how it all fits together to create a natural and engaging speaking style.
It's like we're building a masterpiece layer by layer.
Exactly. And to complete our masterpiece, we need one more crucial element, confidence.
Couldn't agree more.
You can have all the skills, all the techniques, but if you're not confident, it won't really shine through, right?
Right. Confidence is like the glue that holds everything together. What are your initial thoughts on the confidence building tips from the script?
Well, I really like the part about not being afraid of making mistakes. It's so reassuring to know that everyone messes up, even native speakers. It's just part of the process.
That's a great point to highlight, and the script emphasizes that mistakes are inevitable. The key is to not let them hold you back. But we'll dive into all of that and some other really great confidence boosters in part 2 of our deep dive. Stay tuned. So before we got a little sidetracked with the whole confidence thing, we were talking about how even small changes in like pronunciation or how you emphasize a word, it can completely change what you're saying.
It's pretty wild, right?
It is, it is.
It's like those optical illusions, where the same image can look totally different depending on how you look at it. Except in this case, we're playing with sounds and emphasis.
Exactly. And the script, it gives some really practical tips for mastering this subtle but powerful part of English.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the cheat sheet to sounding more native.
Well, one of the most effective techniques is, and this might sound a little strange, practicing speaking in front of a mirror.
Talking to myself in the mirror. Okay. I can see myself doing that. But how does that actually help?
Well, for one thing, it's like, giving a presentation, but to your most supportive audience, yourself.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it helps you become more aware of your physical presence when you speak. You start to notice things like your posture, your facial expressions, even your hand gestures, all of which they contribute to how you come across.
It's like that saying, body language speaks louder than words.
Yeah.
So even if your grammar is perfect, if your body language is saying like, I'm nervous, it's gonna undermine your message.
For sure. And speaking of noticing things, another really helpful tip is recording yourself, speaking English, and then listening back to it.
Oh, I love that one. It's like having an instant replay. You can catch those little errors or places where you could improve, your pronunciation or your intonation, things you might not even notice while you're speaking.
Exactly. And what I think is even more powerful is, as you listen to these recordings over time, you can actually hear yourself getting better.
That's awesome.
It's motivating, right? To realize that your hard work is paying off.
It's like having a language coach in your pocket.
Right.
So we've covered a lot here. We've talked about fluency exercises, grammar tips, idioms, intonation, confidence boosters. It's like a whole toolkit.
It is. It's like a whole toolkit for leveling up your English. And I think what makes this script so effective is that it gives you these tips in a way that feels doable. It's not just about theory. It's about like empowering you to use them to actually improve.
Right. It's like having a roadmap to fluency with clear directions and helpful signposts along the way. But before we move on, I'm curious, what stood out to you the most from this script? What's the most valuable takeaway for our listener who's probably eager to put all of this into practice?
That's a great question. For me, the biggest takeaway is the emphasis on consistent practice. It reminds us that fluency and confidence, they're not, overnight achievements. They take dedication, effort, and a commitment to showing up, even when it's tough.
Yeah. It's like any skill, right? Whether it's playing an instrument, learning a new sport, or speaking a new language, consistency is key. You don't expect to become a virtuoso overnight.
Right. You got to put in the time.
And speaking of putting in the effort, the script, it ends with a really important message about confidence building.
It does. It does.
I remember they talk about how fear of making mistakes, it can really hold us back.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of language learners, they struggle with, right?
Yeah.
We're so afraid of making mistakes that we end up not speaking at all. But the script, it encourages us to reframe that thinking, to see mistakes as valuable.
They even say that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
Exactly. So it's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the journey, learning from our missteps, celebrating those little victories.
I love that. It's like give yourself permission to mess up, to experiment, to play with the language. That's how you'll truly learn.
And I think that's a really powerful message for anyone who's feeling, discouraged or intimidated. It reminds us that we're all capable of this, of achieving fluency, confidence, as long as we're willing to put in the work.
It's like they're giving us a pep talk saying, you got this. And you know what? I think they're right.
I think so too.
So before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we talk about how to actually find the time for all this practice, I want to ask you something. If you had to pick just one technique from this episode, just one, to focus on this week, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are so many great tips. But if I had to choose, I think I would go with shadowing. It's such a powerful way to improve your pronunciation, your intonation, your rhythm, all at once. And you can do it anywhere, anytime, with any material.
That's a great choice. And you know what? I think I might join you on that challenge this week. Shadowing, here we come. Okay, listeners, get ready for the final part of our deep dive where we tackle the age-old question, how to fit all this fantastic language learning into our busy, busy lives. Okay, so we've talked about all these awesome techniques to boost your spoken English, shadowing, speed talking, throwing in some cool idioms. It's been a lot. But now I know you're thinking, how do I find the time for all this?
Right, that's always the question, isn't it? We're all so busy.
We are.
But the good news is you don't need hours every day to make progress. It's more about consistency. Those little efforts, they really add up.
So quality over quantity. I like that. But I need specifics. Our listeners probably ready to put all this into action, but maybe feeling a little, overwhelmed.
Totally. Let's rethink how we approach practice. It doesn't have to be this big formal thing. Think about your day, your routine. What are those little pockets of time where you're kind of just wasting time?
Okay, I'm thinking like my commute, waiting in line at the grocery store, maybe even doing the dishes. Those are definitely times when my mind is, it's kind of just wandering.
Exactly. Instead of listening to music or scrolling through your phone, that's prime time for immersing yourself in English. Listen to a podcast during your commute. Practice shadowing while you're doing chores. It's amazing how much you can improve without even changing your schedule.
I'm seeing the light here. It's about like sneaking English into those little moments that usually just disappear.
Right. And here's another idea. Think about social media. That can actually be an awesome tool for language learning.
Wait, social media.
Yeah. Follow some accounts in English, leave comments, send messages to friends who are also learning.
That's so smart. It makes practicing feel, well, less like work and more like fun.
Exactly. It's all about making English part of your life, not just something you study.
Okay, I love that. So no drastic changes, just small, sustainable habits. Makes sense.
And remember, like the script says, consistent practice, that's the key. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results right away. Just keep practicing, stay curious, and, have fun with it.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And you got to enjoy the journey.
Right? That's a great way to put it. So to wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave our listener with a little challenge. Choose one technique, just one, that really spoke to you. Maybe it's shadowing, maybe it's speed talking, maybe it's trying out some new idioms, and commit to practicing it for just 5 minutes every day this week.
5 minutes. Anyone can do 5 minutes. And I bet you'll be surprised at how much of a difference it makes. Your confidence, your fluency, it'll all start to click.
Exactly. The most important step is the first one. So take that step, embrace the journey, and keep those English muscles working.
And that, my friends, is a wrap on another deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration. Until then, happy practicing.